Hey everyone, welcome to the Paranormal Peeps podcast. And to my right, I have
Jamie
and Josh
and me, Elisa. And for today, we have a great story to tell about the Salem witch trials.
a familiar one.
very much more in the news lately, though, right?
Well, look at the time of year for one.
Yeah,
It always comes around this time of year,
it does.
but it's widely known.
Well, and especially with Hocus Pocus 2 coming out, or that it came out.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, thoughts on that movie? I mean, obviously, I think it goes without saying, it's not as good as the first one, but what were your thoughts, Elisa?
Oh, I think I had just had my hopes up too high. But also I'm watching it. I have to think about this. I was watching it as an adult versus a kid. Because when it came out, I was the same age as the little girl was.
Yeah.
So I was like 8 or 9 years old when it came out. And so it was a super fun, kind of a spooky movie, right?
Yeah.
But as an adult watching the second one, I was like, they could have made that way scarier. Even for kids, I felt like they could have made it. It was too family friendly for me.
Well, right, because over the years, like, we become more desensitized to certain things as well, and so it's not as
Even my kids didn't think it was nearly
scary.
as exciting as the first one was.
Well, the first one wasn't scary either, though.
No, but it was more intense. I felt like.
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot more intense scenes in there.
But I mean, I still loved the movie. I still loved seeing the witches come back and all of that. And I loved how it ended and the sisters reuniting and things like that. Like, I loved that. That was really cute.
Did you see after the credits?
Where they were singing?
Nope.
What?
After at the end?
I don't think so.
Oh.
Why don't you explain, Jamie?
Yeah, but no spoilers. I mean,
No, true.
I mean, if any of our listeners haven't yet seen it, I don't want to
That's true.
If you haven't seen it, or if you have seen it and haven't watched all the way after the credits, watch all the way after the credits. There's a 30-second scene in there that shows...
I don't even think it's that long, but...
It's not long, yeah. But...
Yeah, check it out.
I guess the part that I found confusing with all of it was just how it all started. Because at the end of the first movie, the witches were destroyed by the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then some guy makes a black candle.
Yeah, he got the thing from the spell book.
Right, but then it brought them back to life after they were destroyed. It seemed weird, like, because even in the first movie, they weren't fully destroyed.
That's what my kids were wondering, like, how did they come back? I thought they were destroyed.
I just had another thought. So when he's like a shop owner?
Mm-hmm.
Warlock, I'm sure.
A warlock, yeah.
Oh, well, he must have been, because he got it out of the book, and only those that are like witches can actually see what's in the book.
Yeah, so he must have been a warlock.
It's weird, though, because when they gave him the stuff to go and try to get all the ingredients and stuff to make their potion or whatever, he seemed completely clueless.
Well, I think he did on purpose because he knew that he was going to get in trouble in the end no matter what. So he's trying to delay. I guess we're kind of spoiling the movie.
We're kind of shooting holes in it, too, a little bit. So,
anyways.
But that's what we do, though. I mean, like, in that sense, right? It's like we watch a movie that we had moderately high hopes for, and we kind of let down, and we just say why we were kind of let down by it.
But at the same time, the second time I watched it, it was way cuter.
it was.
I really enjoyed watching it the second time.
Mm-hmm.
I think the part that was the funniest of all is when they had to go find their brooms to fly on. And Mary comes out with 2 Roombas.
Yes.
I know, that was cute. My kids loved that part.
So like that part was fun. Before we get into the full topic, though, there's a little bit of housekeeping we need to do. So in 4 days, we have our second public investigation
Yes.
at Benson Grist Mill. There are still tickets available. Tickets are $20 a piece, and it's on the 29th of October.
Which is a Saturday. Starts at what, 7?
7.
And it's going to be super fun. We want you to come in your costumes, and we're going to do a costume contest.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, and you get to investigate in your costume if you so choose, if it's, works for you in that avenue. You can investigate in your costume. Like, very few times you get to actually dress up and go investigate.
Yeah, and we're going to do costume contests.
We will have prizes.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fun.
And we will be serving hot cocoa, apple cider. We'll have some snacks and variety of things there.
And we'll have a
people.
warm heater. So
we'll have 2 warm porch heaters.
Yep.
Those tall ones. So don't worry about being cold. You can always come warm up. And we're also going to have a vendor there. We're going to have Lavinia's Eden, run by a friend of ours that is a part of Broken Wings Paranormal. She's going to be there selling her little baubles and stuff. She does some beautiful wire wrapping of stones and crystals. She has all sorts of neat stuff. She can tell you all about them. But yeah, she'll be there too, selling some of her wonderful creations.
Yep. And, and then last week we had our first public investigation.
We did.
It was really fun.
It was a lot of fun. And that was at the Petite Neat Museum in Payson, Utah.
One of my favorite places.
I've been really enjoyed investigating there. I've only ever been there twice.
Yeah.
This being the second time. But
Yeah.
It's always been a fun place to investigate.
I've been there hundreds. Like, literally.
Yeah.
Yes, you have.
Well, it does help that they have a dance studio in the basement.
That I used to go to like 2-3 times a week.
But no, it was a good night. I think that the people that came, I think that they had a great time.
Yeah, I think they did too. And they were all newbies. They had never been on an investigation
Which was
before.
super fun. They were asking a lot of questions, which is great.
Yeah.
Like, they were respectful. It was really, really fun.
Yeah.
They were a great group. We actually really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun.
So thank you all who came. That was way fun.
Yes, and we hope to see you at a future investigation.
Absolutely.
We'd love to have you back.
And now on to the main event in this case. We're going to talk more about witches.
Woohoo.
Yay.
Which, honestly, like, Salem, Mass, like, and if anyone brings up that name, the only thing that any of us can ever think about is the witch trials.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because it only went on for a year.
But there were actually 3 total witch trials that happened in Salem.
Yeah.
The first one being the most popular, or I should say the most known.
Mm-hmm.
I would say popular in the fact that it became like the basis for the play The Crucible. There was a movie made about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's been featured in obviously Hocus Pocus 1 and 2. It was in Hubie Halloween. If you haven't seen that movie, it's on Netflix.
Yeah,
it's not that great, but
you didn't miss much.
But the place has been, thought about to be haunted. And like if you Google it up, if you look at it, the first 3 pages are all ghost tours. So like there's a lot of paranormal tourism that happens in the town.
Well, I think it's kind of expected with how tragic everything was and how innocent people were. And so it kind of makes it really famous.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It's also one of the oldest still occupied towns as well. Like we're talking about things that happened, in the 1600s.
Yeah.
And which for the United States is
it's pretty old
it's
for
old
the US.
For us.
Yeah. And then you go to Britain, they're like 1600s. Like,
That ain't nothing.
we got stuff back from like 1,000. Like, nothing. So getting into the whole witch trial piece, like you have to kind of to look at the time frame, right? So Europe went through their big witch trials in like the 1300s and through the 1600s, and tens of thousands of witches or people who believed to be witches were put to death at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty much winding down in Europe. But in the US, it hadn't really hit yet. So with the Puritans living in that area, so you have a very heavily religious group of people. And then there was a smallpox epidemic that happened. There was, issues with people, warring families and those things. And so like you get this environment that now becomes kind of ripe for something to happen and kind of take off.
Well, I think everyone's in upheaval, like everybody's sick. People are dying, and people want to accuse other people of things, and you can do a lot of things without being caught. And to me, that was part of the reason for the witch trials. I think part of the reason was so that other people could use that as an excuse to take advantage of others.
Yeah. It's like, hey, look, you got something I want. And
now you're a witch, and I'm going to...
and now I get to take it.
And now it's mine.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, like, there were lots of people that ended up being imprisoned because of this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We know of the people that were executed mainly, but it like in a short period of time, it like expanded greatly across the whole area. And it wasn't just Salem. It was Essex, and there's like 2 other counties that it involved in. And so it wasn't just one small area. It was a whole 3-county area that this whole thing was going on. And so, like, if you didn't like somebody in the next county over, you could just accuse them of being a witch.
And we found that it doesn't take much to be accused.
No,
No.
it really doesn't.
It really didn't.
No. Here's the interesting thing, though, is there's a group of researchers that were trying to find a reasonable explanation, like a scientific explanation to it. And they actually came up with it was published in 1976. It's a fungus called ergot. It's found in rye, wheat, and other cereals.
Yeah.
So when you ingest this, it can cause symptoms such as delusion, vomiting, and muscle spasms.
Ah.
That makes sense.
Yep.
And what's interesting is, like, I believe it has, like, in order for this fungus to grow, it has to be like wet. Like, it has to be
Moisture of some kind.
Right. It's a very wet year. And supposedly the year that this happened in 1692, it ended up being a very wet spring.
Mm-hmm.
And so that this fungus could have been growing on these cereals, which would have caused this to happen. I'd like to think that this is the reason behind it. I don't think so. I think there's something much more nefarious behind all of it.
And
how do you mean?
It could be the case for some, because at that point it was like anybody who acted strangely was considered a witch or could be a witch or claimed, people would say that they were a witch. So, I mean, I'm sure there's multiple reasons how this all came about or why people were accused. Right.
This is why I said I don't think it was the wheat or the rye in this avenue. So it started in January of 1692.
Okay.
So you have a 9-year-old Elizabeth Parnes or Paris, and 11-year-old Abigail Williams. And so she was the daughter and niece of Samuel Paris, the minister in town, right? They began having fits, including violent contortions, uncontrollable outbursts, and screaming. And a local doctor took a look at them and said, they're bewitched. Great doctors, right?
That means they had no idea what it was.
Exactly
Pretty much.
what it means.
I don't know. So let's just say, yeah, they're bewitched.
Exactly. Shortly after, some other girls in the neighborhood started having similar symptoms, right? So that would point to that piece, right? But all of a sudden, these girls come forward and we've got arrest warrants issued for 3 people. The Paris's Caribbean slave, Tituba, and then another homeless woman by the name of Sarah Good, and an elderly Sarah Osborne. And the girls are the ones that accused them of being witches.
Oh, goodness gracious.
So they said, yeah, we're bewitched, and it's their fault. They're the ones that did it to us.
Do you think that those girls weren't like kind of coerced into saying those
Oh,
things?
I'm sure, especially at that young of an age.
Yeah.
Because kids are so trusting of their parents and of adults.
Yeah.
That I'm sure their parents or someone that they trust was enabling them
this.
to
Yeah.
believe,
Feeding them names.
and giving them stories.
Yeah. So those three witches were brought in to the magistrates, Jonathan Corwin and John Hawthorne, and they were questioned. Even while their accusers were in the courtroom putting on a grand display of spasms, contortions, screaming, and writhing, and Good and Osborne denied their guilt, and Tituba confessed.
But why?
That is a very good question.
Well, I think it probably was because at the time it was like, all right, well, you confess or we're going to kill you. And so either way, you're going to die, right? But the last ditch effort is to say that you did it. You know, if you have nothing left to lose.
To save your neck. You're trying to...
Right. And
literally save your neck.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly.
well, and she actually did save her neck in this avenue. But what she ended up saying was that there was a man in, she said that there were other witches in town and that there was a man in black that came to her and asked her to sign a book, in which she signed the book. So she's basically saying Satan came to her, asked her to sign a book, and she
Signed
did,
her soul?
signed her soul away.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's strange that she went to that level. Now, of course, she is one that wasn't, I do believe she was not actually executed. So she also said that she had images of black dogs, red cats, yellow birds.
Tweety bird.
Oh,
Right?
Yellow bird. Just like the man in black, Johnny Cash.
Yeah. And, you know, of course, she implemented several other people. She said there were several other witches who were just trying to destroy the Puritans. So
So we took it even further.
she took it even further.
Yeah.
Here's what's very interesting is one of the ways they used to determine if you were a witch or not.
see if they float.
See if they float. And if you drowned,
You weren't a witch.
you weren't a witch.
And if you float, you're a witch and we're going to hang you
Or stone you.
or stone you.
So die one way or die another.
exactly.
Well, she would have known this at the time, right?
Mhm.
But remember, she's also from the Caribbean.
Right.
What did she know how to do in the Caribbean?
What,
Swim.
voodoo?
Swim.
Oh. I'm like, voodoo? Hey, they have practices over there.
They do. No, they absolutely do.
But yes, swim.
Right. So if they threw her in water, she was hosed. Because she was going to be able to swim or float.
Couldn't she just like put on a good show?
Right?
Yeah,
Blow
but-
out all the water out of her lungs and then slowly
Drown?
sink and just wait for everybody to go, hold your breath, and then come back up.
Or just sink and then swim away underwater.
Just escape.
She goes like half a mile down. Suckers! Keeps swimming.
So, of course, all of this happens, right? And they got these three women in jail. So now in May of 1962, the newly appointed governor of Massachusetts, whose name was William Phips, he ordered an establishment of a special court of oyer, or to hear, and terminer to decide on witchcraft cases in Suffolk, Essex, and Middlesex counties. So it was provided over two judges, including Hawthorne, Samuel Sewell, and William Stoughton. The court handed down its first conviction against Bridget Bishop on July 2nd.
Boom.
And she was hanged 8 days later, which on a place that's now known as Gallows Hill.
Makes sense.
And we're going to be talking about those judges periodically through this podcast, but
Yeah.
they're quite interesting people.
These people were major players in the
Huge.
Salem area, or at least in the greater county area. So 5 more people are hanged in July, and in August. Sorry, July and August. Both those months had 5 people hang, and then in September there were 8 more people hang. In addition, 7 other accused witches died in jail, and then Giles Corey, he had a different story.
Do tell.
Okay, so the execution of Giles Corley, they call him a warlock. Let's start with George Corwin. So he was labeled as this sadistic murderer who thrived on torture and killing, making sure like people were suffering before they died. So Corwin took a fancy to a certain type of cruel killing. Allegedly, his favorite method of dragging confessions out of the accused was to tie them from their neck to their ankles, by bending them in half until blood streamed from their nose. Like, painful. I mean,
Jeez.
So they're basically upside down.
yes. Poor Giles Corey was one of the only warlocks. Like, you can use quotes around those warlocks, right?
Yeah, there were 5 total.
Yeah, named, accused, I guess. To be accused during the witch trial hysteria, his punishment stretched to new limits. On the eerie morning of September 18th, 1692, Giles Corey's execution was scheduled to follow the accused witch Anne Putnam Jr.'s, and Anne was one lucky witch. However, for on the day that she escaped the death of the vengeful witnesses were so desperate to watch, Corey was not so lucky. In the months leading up to his trial, there had been innumerable claims of Giles Corey being a warlock. In June 1692, Elizabeth Woodwell and Mary Walcott, or 2 of the afflicted, had watched in shock as Giles Corey entered the Salem meeting house, despite the fact that he'd already been imprisoned. In another instance, a ghost had risen from the dead to tell Anne Putnam Jr. that Corey had been the spirit's murderer. So 2 weeks before the official trial, the court had attempted to push Corey to answer the formality which started the trial. Without saying the words, "By God and my country," no trial could occur. So it has to start with those words, or else the trial can't start. So Corey refused, standing mute, as the term applied. The punishment for the crime under English law meant that Corey was punished by pressing under heavy weights until the words were finally said. So until he finally exclaimed that he had done it.
So you basically torture somebody until they confess.
And then they die anyway. I mean,
Either way, you're dead.
either way, you're dead. So after months of going back and forth, including Corey's good friend, Captain Thomas Gardner, pleading with them to just confess, on September 19th was the final day. Corey refused to confess to the crime, nor would he say the necessary words for the actual trial to continue. And so George Corwin adhered to the law, however cruel it was. So Corwin put Giles Corey into the dirt, leveling a flat wooden board on top of his splayed body. Then the true torture began. One by one, large stones were placed on top of Corey, as a group of onlookers gathered round to watch the proceedings in an open pasture not far from the prison. While the hope was for Corey to plead guilty early on, he never did so. In fact, it is said that Giles Corey spoke only once throughout the entire ordeal. "More weight," he ordered, as his body imprinted into the dirt. Allegedly, as Corey's tongue began to roll from his mouth, a sign that death was upon him, George Corwin used the tip of his walking stick and pushed Corey's tongue back into his mouth. Corey died not long after that, and his body was so brutally crushed that there was no hope for his revival. His death was the only pressing to ever occur in Massachusetts, but it is one image that we have never been able to forget. Corey's body was buried. It's called Butts Brook, the burial place of suicides in Salem's town, as though he had chosen to take his own life. And George Corwin, the high sheriff whom everyone despised, visited Corey's home and took all of this man's money and goods as his own. So centuries later, George Corwin is still remembered as one of the most hated men of the Salem witch trials. And so the story is just crazy in and of itself. That's why I'm saying, like, when people have an idea of wanting to steal something that somebody else has, they're going to be a witch, or they're going to be a warlock, or they're going to be something, so that they can be accused and I can go take their stuff.
Yep. Get them out of the way and then just rob them.
Yeah.
I mean, and that was an easy way to do it during that time.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you look at some of the other people, right, like that are accused, you've got Alice Parker. You know, she was married to a fisherman, John Parker. The couple rented a home by the waterfront, and her husband had children from a previous marriage, while Alice appears to have none of her own. She never had any kids of her own. And so beyond the information, it's hard to say like how all of that came about, like what was their goal in getting rid of her.
Yeah.
But I think she was an easy target. Here's a childless mother who you can accuse. She's kind of like one of those people that spoke her mind.
Oh, very forefront.
Yeah, very forthright.
Yeah.
And so it's like her neighbors could claim that she bewitched them, that she gave them ominous predictions. And that's how she got executed.
I would have been executed. Not saying that I can give predictions, but it's like if you people watch good enough, then you can generally tell how they're going to respond and react to certain things.
Oh, yeah.
And that's probably what she did.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, and if you have a more of a type A personality, which she probably did,
Mhm.
then that's not any help to her either because she's just going to speak her mind,
Yeah.
She's not going to mince words.
which during that time is not very great. Like,
even today, people don't like to hear it.
Right. They don't. And this time they could be like, well, I don't like the way she talks to me, so she's a witch.
yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see if she floats.
Yeah. Yeah, only if they actually would have used that in this case. Like, their trial evidence was bad.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and we'll get to that here.
This would be
in a minute.
laughable during our day.
It just seems like, looking at it and how things went trial wise, it just seems like they were just making it up as they went along just to get through it
Yeah.
and to hang these people.
Well, and the challenge with it, right, is like, I think what ended up getting to them more so than anything, right? Because for them, witchcraft was a sign of like the devil or
Yeah.
devil worship.
Right.
And so because they were so religious and anti, all of that, right?
Mhm.
They're like, look, if it's of the devil, it's evil and we must eradicate it.
Yeah, but I think it
Mhm.
took another turn as well.
Well,
Beyond religion, just beyond, I think it went the direction of, I don't like you.
Power hungry.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or I want your land. How do I get you out of the way?
Well, exactly. And I think that comes to this next one. Her name is Anne Pudator. So she was originally from Falmouth, Maine. She lived with her first husband, Thomas Greenlit, and their 5 children. So she had quite a few kids
Mhm.
at this point in time. But in 1677, they moved to Salem, and then her husband died shortly afterwards. So now she's a widow. She needs to be able to support herself. She ends up becoming a midwife and a nurse. She ends up getting hired by this blacksmith, Jacob. And so she was supposed to look after his alcoholic wife, Isabel.
Oh, dear.
Right. So Isabel ends up dying, most likely from excessive alcohol use.
Mhm.
And Anne ends up marrying her Jacob, who's 20 years her junior.
Cougar.
Yeah.
Even back then. Woo! No.
So, and if you think about it, blacksmithing at the time was a really wealthy
Mm-hmm.
way to make a living. So he was very well off. Well, he ends up dying
Dude.
in 1682. He
Third time's a
dies.
charm. I'm just kidding.
Right?
So now she's 60 years old and super wealthy
Dang.
and a widow, a 2-time widow.
But at least she's not hurting for money.
Well, no, but unfortunately,
That comes to
Yeah, I know.
kick her in the butt.
so at 70 years old, she's accused of being a witch.
Oh,
That's
goodness.
terrible. I mean, can you imagine trying to do that to our elderly? You
Yeah,
know?
it's nuts.
Like, that's
awful.
terrible.
yeah.
It's like, it doesn't matter what you did in your lifetime.
No, it doesn't. But she was an easy target.
Yeah.
She had money. She was a widow.
Mhm.
There's no, at that point in time, there was no man to speak for her.
Right.
No man to back her up.
Nope.
And so you're a witch. Now you die. Now
and we get your money.
Now I can take your
Yep.
money. It's just nuts. The amount of all of that happened, right? So throughout all of this, there was a minister by the name of Cotton Mather, and he warned of the dubious value of spectral evidence, which is the testimony about dreams and visions. His concerns went largely unheeded during the trials. So his son, who was the president of Harvard, joined in on this idea that this evidence shouldn't be used in these trials. He said, "It would be better that 10 suspected witches may escape than one innocent person be condemned."
Finally.
Finally, some sense, right? But amid all of the warning of the trials, nothing happened until Governor Phipps dissolved the court and mandated that the successor disregard spectral evidence, and the trials continued to dwindle in intensity until 1693. And then by May, it was over.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. But that's the thing. Like, these people were tried and executed on evidence associated to dreams and visions.
Ridiculous.
Oh, it's absolutely horrible. So, if you ever have a bad dream about your spouse or significant other or your neighbor, obviously it's a sign of witchcraft. And you can
I'm a witch, apparently, because I've had some pretty vivid, scary dreams.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody has, to be honest. I mean,
Yeah.
But yikes.
So on January 14th, 1697, the General Court ordered a day of fasting and soul searching for the tragedy in Salem. So they finally got to realize that what they did was wrong. It took them 4 years. So that's not too bad.
Better late than never, but still, geez.
Exactly. In 1702, the court declared the trials unlawful.
Of course.
And in 1711, the colony passed a bill restoring the rights and good names of those accused, granting 600 pounds restitution to their heirs. However, it wasn't until 1957, more than 250 years later, that Massachusetts formally apologized for the events in 1692. It took them a long time to get back to saying, we're sorry.
But at that point,
Foolish pride.
At that point, none of them are alive of being accused. All in all, over 200 people were actually imprisoned in jail. And then a handful were executed. But
about 20.
Yeah, about 20, and then the 9 that died in prison waiting for trial.
Yeah.
Or for execution. So that's a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
For living just like everybody else does, but everybody else kept their mouth shut.
Yeah.
Like they're not talking about their dreams or... it's so dumb.
Oh, it's so awful.
Let's talk about some of the sheriffs and the people that put them there. Let's talk about the High Sheriff George Corwin. So 3 months after Corwin stepped into office as High Sheriff, he was tasked with transporting 5 of the most infamous witches on July 19th, 1692. Rebecca Nurse, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Hoe, Sarah Good, and Sarah Wilds. And they were removed from jail and shoved into wooden carts, just like how you would imagine. Amidst an early morning fog, townspeople lined the streets to watch the cart rumble down the dirt roads to the lake for the executions. At the time, it was apparently tradition for the accused to attempt facing death in order to both confess their sins or to prove their innocence, like we had talked about. Ironically, however, the method of proving one's innocence generally meant their death. As High Sheriff, George Corwin had fulfilled his duty in bringing the woman to the gallows. From there, it was Reverend Nicholas Noyes' responsibility to coerce the accused into admitting their guilt. Noyes demanded one of the accused witches, Sarah Good, to confess her sins. She refused, snapping, "You're a liar. I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." And with those words, Sarah Good sealed her fate. Corwin positioned them all above the lake, linking their nooses around their respective necks. Then he hanged them all, and their bodies plunged into the water. So go ahead.
So the minister was the executioner.
Uh-huh.
I don't think you would find that today.
No. They're the ones that are there to say, do you have any last words? Can I help you through your transition? So fun fact about this is Sarah Good's final words would later come to haunt the townspeople of Salem when Reverend Noyes died from bleeding at the mouth. The blood vessels had popped, but believers believed that he'd been cursed by the witch. So following the executions, the bodies were buried nearby in the rocky terrain under cover of darkness. Rebecca Nurse's family took a small boat, maybe like a canoe, up the river so that they could retrieve Rebecca's body. And so along its narrowing length to the Nurse's land, that's where they buried her on privately on home ground. So, these people had no care. Let's just throw them in a crate all together and have them go through town as everybody is seeing them. And I'm sure they're calling them names and
throwing things
at them. And,
Well, executions back then were a public affair.
I know. And it was like an event.
It was. They would actually pack lunches. Picnics and have a picnic with their kids.
That's so terrible.
At the gallows.
I wonder if they were like, you can go watch your first hanging when you're 8 years old. You have to wait. It makes you wonder.
Yeah, it's definitely a much more morbid time.
Yeah. So let's talk about Judge John Hathorne. So he was a prominent judge of the trials and a good friend of Jonathan Corwin. He is responsible for handing down the most executions. Hawthorne had a well-documented reputation for his callousness towards those accused of witchcraft, and it's primarily because of his treatment of the innocent that they believe the house that he had owned was haunted, but he earned the nickname the Hanging Judge. Many also accused him of using his seat on the bench to commit murder, which obviously I'm sure he did. I think that's how a lot of people were.
Well, if you're friends with essentially, let's call him a crooked sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're friends with a crooked sheriff, and you're a judge, you're kind of helping each other out.
Well, they use their power for evil.
Well, yeah. And to be in charge of that many executions, hunting down the most executions, I don't know if that I would want to be known for that. That is not something that I would want to be known for.
Maybe he thought he was the protector of the goodness of the area.
Maybe he was just delusional.
Well, and part of me wonders if this was just obviously this was a phase, but you know how somebody will start a rumor and then it just snowballs, right? And so everybody's jumping in on the bandwagon and wants to be a part of this. And I'm not a witch, but that person is. So if you're claiming that somebody else is a witch, then that automatically rules you out.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But part of me is wondering, how wealthy did these judges and sheriffs get because of this? It's
a very good question. And if there's only, a handful of proven cases
right
of theft, that means usually that's only the tip of the iceberg.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really wonder because it's not going to be everything written down for us to know.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's speculation. But I don't know, it'd be interesting to find that out. So should we go into the hauntings?
Of course. And I think that's the thing, the most interesting thing about Salem at this point is it seems like every building in every house and everything in town is actually haunted.
And it's the things that they have are fairly similar throughout the houses. They're all about the same type of hauntings, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's start off with the Pickman house. This house is located at 43 Charter Street and was built by Samuel Pickman in 1665. Now, Pickman was a sailor, much like most of Salem. The interesting thing is that this home is next to the old Burying Point Cemetery, which is the oldest cemetery in Salem.
And it's the second oldest in the nation.
Yeah, that's old.
That is so old.
Among the many people that once called Pickman House home, there was this French painter. His name was Michel Felice Cornet. And he was an artist famous for his beautiful marine paintings, murals, and portraits. What's interesting about him is he comes over from Italy to the U.S., to the New World. And he's seeing that no one's eating tomatoes. Like they have them, like they're growing, and no one's eating them. And it's because the people in the area thought that tomatoes were poisonous.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And
So did they plant them and grow them?
I don't know how they were like they obviously had,
And just
someone
didn't eat
had
them?
to have. I wonder if it wasn't the Native Americans that
I think it was the
originally.
Native Americans that did, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's what I remember.
Yeah, so probably the indigenous tribes in the area were the ones that planted them, which is funny because if they're eating them,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't you think that they were safe to eat and not poisonous?
Unless you weren't watching them eat them.
Well, this is true. In order to prove that they were safe to eat, he sat on his doorstep and ate them in front of public.
Get a little salt, a little pepper,
Perfect.
Yeah.
put it on a sandwich with some bacon. So good.
I just think he was eating them like
raw.
Like
raw,
an apple.
like an apple.
Mm-hmm.
The ghosts in the house, right? So according to local legend, a family of 3 moved into the home, a man, his wife, and 7-year-old daughter. Shortly after setting in the home, the man's mental health began to deteriorate, declining each day to the point of insanity.
Wow.
So he claimed that he could see and hear demons in the house. And in his struggle to fight the evil entities that plagued his existence, he became increasingly irritable. His violent outbursts would horrify his family, each one more jarring than the one before.
That's scary.
It's like, why not just commit him to an insane asylum or claim he was a witch? Of course, this is after the fact, right? So one day, amid one of his manic episodes, he chained his daughter in the attic, deprived her of all the comforts she once enjoyed. She defecated and urinated in place, starving alone and frightened. With each passing day, she waited for death to release her from her confinement.
Sad.
Super sad. His wife was petrified, torn between wanting to protect her daughter and being too scared to face her husband, which I can get. Like this is a common domestic violence situation.
Right.
She's obviously, she put her fears aside. She begged her husband to release their child, but obviously he did not care. Eventually, the man got tired of his wife, irritated by her presence. He gathered rope, tied her to a tree in his yard. He made his way to the kitchen where he began to heat a block of wax.
Oh, gosh.
After the wax had come to a rolling boil, he grabbed the rusty cast iron pot, poured it over his restrained wife's head, and her end did not come quickly. She ended up screaming and howling in pain for what seemed like eternity, dying a slow and agonizing death.
Aww.
Where were the neighbors?
That's
Anybody.
a very, like, if someone's yelling and screaming like that, you'd be able to hear them
Well, and she
a
wasn't.
ways away.
Well, he had to go melt that wax, and that takes a little bit of time. Yes, wax melts fairly quickly, but still, like, she had been out there for a little bit
Yeah.
before he came back out. And I guarantee you she wasn't just not making a peep and just waiting for him to come back. Like, she
Yeah.
had to have, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's not like the houses are super insulated. It's not
And
like,
she's tied outside to a tree. She's outside
I
screaming.
know. I'm sure people could hear her.
Oh, I'm sure. Her screams are eventually drowned out by the hardening of the wax. He went inside and hung himself.
Oh,
Whoa.
heavens.
Coward.
So double murder, then suicide. There's a spirit of a famished girl that can be seen often. While snapping photos in the building, visitors have captured what looks like a young girl staring out of the second floor window. Employees of the museum across the street claim to have heard disembodied screams at night, particularly that voices sound like a child. Outside from the strange sightings of the girl, pictures have been captured of bright orbs and human faces floating inside the house.
Ew.
So could you imagine like being in the museum across the street and then hearing someone like a blood-curdling scream coming from
I think
like,
part
next
of you was
door?
like, do I dial 911 or is this?
Right?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure like the first time someone heard it, they probably did call 911.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the cops are like, there's nobody there.
Yeah.
And then the next night they're like, okay, this has got to be a joke.
Yeah. So let's talk about the ghost of Giles Corey. So there are those that say that Giles Corey inhabits the merchant Some blame Corey for knocking over candlesticks. Trash cans are overturned, items found out of place, deadbolts open and close on their own. The merchant's most popular spectacle must be of the Lady in Black. Normally it's the Lady in White.
Oh, no, that's coming up too.
Yeah. But so this one's the Lady in Black. And no one is totally sure what she wants or where she came from, but there have been similar sightings of her. And a female spirit in a black costume with blacker curls. The Lady in Black has even been described as being having transparent skin, as if she was like made of glass. And photos were taken of the Lady in Black showing a full-length figure with unbrushed hair. And the photo was taken in like the 1980s. They were trying to take a picture of an employee, but they actually caught that image instead.
Wow.
That's kind of cool.
There have been multiple accounts of people experiencing a choking sensation on the second floor on the property. And on one occasion, a visitor was upstairs and all of a sudden felt an invisible force encircle his throat and squeeze. Air became harder to take in, and his throat had closed up completely. When he twisted around to see what was there, he found an empty hallway, and he was completely alone. And many people believe that Corwin haunted his victims out of the witch dungeon in order to privately interrogate or strangle them in his home, and which is now the Joshua Ward house. But there's no evidence suggesting that Corwin did this, but visitors on the property remain wary anyway, and rightfully so, since the mere idea of being choked by a poltergeist is literally the stuff out of nightmares.
Or normal paranormal investigating.
Yeah. So just as George Corwin's ghost haunts the Joshua Ward house, so does his victim Giles Corey. On more than one occasion, employees have witnessed inexplicable activity that they attribute to the warlock's vengeful spirit. The activity such as books being yanked from the shelves, cold spots in an otherwise warm room, and candles found in pool of wax. Though the candles were never set aflame, they are all said to be signs of Corey's ghost that has not yet crossed over to the other side. And most peculiar is the fact that these candles are often melted into S shapes.
Weird. Defective candles.
Yeah.
Get a new batch.
Right?
That's just how hot it gets in Salem. That must be it.
Must be. There's one more in this, in the Joshua Ward house. So sightings of a female spirit are common occurrences there, especially on the upper floor. It was one stray piece of paranormal evidence that this rogue ghost was an international stardom. In the 1980s, Carlson Realty was hosting a massive holiday party when one of the employees snapped a quick Polaroid photo and then started shaking it. And then Carlson expected to see the image of a light-haired woman enjoying the party. And then when he saw, he glanced down and something entirely different, a dark-haired woman with rough-hewn features and skin that was so pale and translucent that he had to take another look. And most assume the female spirit is one of the witches George Corwin arrested and imprisoned and possibly even killed.
The part that I think is fascinating by that is that they're like, these are the two ghosts that are here. And there's no real proof that it's either of them.
Yeah. But I think that's where the kind of the fun part of it comes in, you know, the rumors, and that's what gets people excited. And
yeah.
And people assume and rumors start from a long time ago and stories change. So, yeah.
Although I will say, though, that getting choked, like feeling like you're being choked by someone behind you and not having anybody there would probably be the most terrifying thing for someone to experience.
Oh, yeah.
That would be really scary for sure.
If it is the sheriff, then he just further brings point to light of as in life, as in death.
Mm-hmm.
Which I could see him haunting that place if that was truly a place that he frequented a lot.
Yeah.
But with Giles Corey, why would you want to go there? Like, what would possess you to go to that house where your known executioner live or is haunting? It's like, you want to fight him in ghost form now?
Good luck.
Right? So let's stay on Giles Corey. So we have the Howard Street Cemetery, which is the 4th oldest cemetery in Salem. And there's 1,100 headstones in this cemetery.
Oh, that's a lot.
It's a lot. But there's an unmarked grave that's there. And it's inhabited by Giles Corey. What they end up saying is that you have to look for this grave. And it's, I mean, how? I have no idea. Like, how do you find an unmarked grave in a cemetery? With
1,100 headstones.
Exactly. But supposedly his grave is there and it's unmarked. The interesting thing is, I don't think we've talked about this, but he was 81.
Oh, quite old.
Yeah.
He was quite old. In Abigail Hobbs's prosecution, she claimed that Giles Corey made her, or she implemented him as a witch, or as a warlock in this case. Which is interesting because you can see how like all of that just like runs around on itself. The cemetery is 2.5 acres, and it was once reserved for strangers, thought later entombed like ship captains, servicemen, and Salem socialites. Captain William Brown, commander of the Crowning Shields, Brutus, was interned at the cemetery as well. So he ended up suffering in a shipwreck just off the area. So it's thought that he is there as well. So like, looks like, Giles Corey is haunting 2 locations along with a ship's captain.
Hey, why not?
Exactly.
I mean, you can still go wherever you want.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's not like you're stuck in one spot.
It was funny because I was actually reading this book the other day and it's fictional, and it's about this lady who can see ghosts, and she goes into the bathroom of her job, and there's a lady that is stuck, a ghost that is stuck in the bathroom. Aww. Because she's so mad about her old boss. And so I'm like, that would be miserable to have to be stuck inside a bathroom all the time.
Right?
Like, no, I'm sorry, but you're going to be confined to the bathroom for the rest of your eternities.
That's awful.
Okay, so let's talk about the Jonathan Corwin house. And he's one of the Salem witch trial judges that we had talked about. They call it the witch house. So the witch house is the only structure still standing today that has direct ties to the Salem witch trials. Since it served as the home for one of the judges who took part in the arrests leading to the multiple executions, it's said that it's haunted by the spirits of the innocent who were hanged. Words, guys, words. Hanged during the trials. And it's been rumored that the witch house was used by Jonathan Corwin to interrogate those accused of witchcraft. And we all know that those interrogations were not friendly interrogations. Not too far from the witch house is the cemetery where Judge Hawthorne is laid to rest, Old Burying Point Cemetery. And so it's allegedly that his spirit is captured on camera numerous times, and thrill seekers still visit there at night to try to catch a glimpse of the infamous judge. But nearby residents claim that wandering ghosts from the cemetery have made their way into their homes. So, which is a little
exciting.
I mean, I wouldn't be mad about that, I guess.
I wouldn't complain.
No.
But an odd practice from this era was to place a shoe inside a home's wall to ward off witches and warlocks. And you wouldn't know it, but they have an old black shoe from the past owner doing just that by putting a shoe in there. And I've actually seen in other ghost hunting shows that they have found a shoe in the wall when they were like renovating and stuff. And we all know that when you renovate a house, the spirits can like pick up and they don't like
Activity,
it.
Yeah.
And so they want to ward those off by putting a shoe in there, I guess.
That seems weird if you just think, let's just
that
put a
to, like,
shoe in there.
Give them the boot.
I don't know, I guess. But perhaps the most frightening item on display is that of an actual witchcraft doll. They call it puppet. Witches would allegedly place hexes on these dolls in order to curse their victims, and the doll in question was actually found in a different yet nearby house. It's said to be the very one in which Bridget Bishop lived, the first woman executed by hanging during the Salem witch trials. So one of the most often reported encounters of paranormal activity is encountering of that of disembodied voices. And people have claimed to have been touched by unseen forces as well as cold spots. And a few people are hearing the voice of a little girl, quite possibly the youngest accused of witchcraft during the trials. And she is 4 years old. 4. That is so mean. I mean, she's 4. I don't know.
Well, and how can she defend herself at that point in time?
You can't. Like, how are you a witch at 4 years old? You're just learning conversations. Like,
Yeah, exactly. So we had basically from 4 to 81.
Yeah.
That's a huge grip of people.
I mean, I wonder if this girl had maybe a disability of some sort, or maybe she had seizures, or, something where someone would have to say that she's a witch or would want to say that she's a witch, but I don't know.
Well, and that brings up, like, who was the accuser?
Right? I don't know. Some really mean person. But this witch house was set to be demolished in 1944 to make way for widening of the streets, and locals banded together and put a stop to it by raising $42,000, which was enough money to pick it up and move the house 35 feet from where it currently sits. So they only had to move it 35 feet.
Not too bad.
But it cost $40,000.
$42,000. So after 2 architects restored the residence to its original 17th century splendor, the witch house was handed over to the city of Salem, at that point becoming a museum. So it's been through the ringer, that house.
Yeah, no kidding. It's got lots of ties to lots of different things.
Uh-huh.
So remember we talked about Gallows Hill being the place of these executions?
Yeah.
It actually wasn't.
Nope.
The actual site is Proctor's Ledge.
Mm-hmm. But they didn't know that for a long time.
No, 2016 is when they figured it out.
Yep.
So they ended up, that area is actually located between Proctor Street and Pope Street. So Proctor's Ledge is a quiet, unassuming area. Like, it overlooks a Walgreens.
Mm-hmm.
It's like this very nice, like, genteel place where
Perfect for hanging people.
exactly where the Gallows Hill, it's like this, it's like this.
Well, it had slopes.
Yeah.
Right. And so they determined that wasn't the place that the executions took place, because they'd have to put them in those wood carts and haul their butts up there.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't make any sense. Especially since it was like this public display of whatever, right?
Yeah.
And everybody came to see these executions and all that. So it didn't make any sense. So they started looking into Proctor's Ledge.
And that's when they found out that it was the execution site.
They proved it.
Yeah, that is neat.
Yeah.
That is super neat
Mm-hmm.
that they're able to figure that out. So local legend has it that there's a lady in white.
Ta-da!
There
Told
she
ya.
is. There she is.
It was coming.
Some visitors have claimed to have caught sight of her through others. Others have thought they've caught her disembodied voice.
Mm-hmm.
Visitors have encountered cold spots, iridescent orbs. And, are these the souls of the people from the witch trials?
Hard to say.
Exactly.
Or dust.
Or dust. Or dust.
I mean,
pollen
it is old.
with light refracting off of it. I mean,
And like all of the bodies, like the people that were executed, they were just basically dumped in a crevice.
Yeah, that's so sad.
mm-hmm.
Just dump them in a hole. So, because they were so distreated upon death, is that enough for them to stay by?
I mean, it's possible. I guess it depends on the person.
Yeah.
They could be like, hey, I'm vengeful, or this was very traumatic, which why wouldn't it be?
Yeah, and I wonder how long, like from the time that they were accused to the time that they were hanged, how long that process took. Because, I mean, you could get very vengeful and
bitter,
very
angry,
bitter.
yeah.
And the longer
Resentful.
the time went on, because being in prisons and jails then was very different than it is now, even.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, now it's like, sweet. I'm off the streets. I get some free meals.
TV.
Like, you got TV, you
free
got
dental, free medical.
books. And I'm not saying that there aren't hard things in prison and jails, because I know there is. But it's very different. Then it was like, now you're put into like this dirt floor and you get sick because you're not warm, and it's humid or wet down there. You know what I mean? So it's
Here's
just
some breadcrumbs to eat.
Well,
yeah.
look at the jail in Bannock.
Mhm.
It was a wood cube with
Yep.
2 wooden cubes for cells. There was no insulation on the walls.
No, it was just logs.
Yeah. What I mean, there actually wasn't logs. It was just boards, which is
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah.
'Cause at least the log houses there have insulation from the wood.
Yeah.
These are just slatted boards, and then it's like, here you go.
The wind goes through the boards. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in talking about jails, let's talk about the ghosts of the old Salem jail.
Ooh.
So
Prisons.
yes,
We like those.
we kind of do. Those are fun. It is true that the old Salem jail was built in 1813, and that less than a single year later, the Howard Street Cemetery was founded. Tim McGuire, a local historian and owner of Salem Night Tour, informed Saul Beatrices. This is terrible.
Good
Ugh.
pronunciation.
Yeah,
We apologize for our super bad pronunciations.
just go
of
with
things.
it. Okay, go with it. My name gets mixed up every single time somebody
Pretend
says it.
it's right.
So just go with it.
Let's go with it.
Okay, for his book, Ghosts of Salem, that back in the 17th century, the property was once the site of Gail Corey's death during the Salem witch trials. According to one particular gory tale, the old Salem jail was constructed with granite from nearby Rockport, Massachusetts. The granite was allegedly salvaged from St. Peter Street, and it's widely believed by ghost tour companies that the slabs of granite used were once stained with blood by the witch trial victims in 1692.
Ooh, infamous. Although hangings don't generally cause a lot of blood.
No. But also when you are getting tortured, or like people are wanting you to confess, to try to get those confessions out, I bet it wasn't some nice chit chat,
It probably wasn't.
you know?
But I wonder though too, like, I mean, these are rumors, right?
Right. Total rumors.
And so it's like after the Berlin Wall came down, people were selling chunks of the Berlin Wall,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, just put some spray paint on a piece of rock and
It's the Berlin Wall.
it's a Berlin Wall. Like, how easy would it be to claim anything was part of the witch trials?
Yeah. So in the early days of the federal-style jail, prisoners most commonly met their death by hanging. Most tally the hangings at an estimated 50 over the years. Hanging which allegedly took place in the prison dining area, because there is nothing like taking a meal as someone meets their maker at the same time. So in 1892, a little over a decade after the prison's expansion, newspaper reporters accounted for an overflow of prisoners at the Salem jail. The reason for the overcrowding, apparently, the county had recently passed an anti-alcohol law, and the drunks were now all in prison. They worried that unless Essex County repealed the drunk law, they would be forced to build a new jail. So by the 1960s and 70s, the prison was still without modern indoor plumbing, and inmates were required to using 5-gallon buckets as personal chamber pots once a week. They were given leave to use one of the 2 operating toilets in the whole property.
This is 1960.
That would smell so bad. I mean, just pooping stinks. Can you imagine diarrhea or like...
No.
Oh,
Well, like,
no thanks.
I mean, we've been to other prisons that have been like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have. And ugh.
Like, here's a 5-gallon Homer bucket. Go poop in it, and then we'll clean it out.
Ooh, I would hate
whenever
to
we
have that
clean it
job.
out.
That would be the most disgusting job ever.
Ugh.
Ugh.
Okay. So, since the jail was abandoned in the early 1990s, sightings of ghosts have been quite regular. So, those passing by the then empty jail swore that they saw lights flickering inside, despite the fact that the prison was no longer hooked up to electrical circuits. Eerie screams have been heard at all hours of the day, and for those who are brave enough to step within the abandoned walls, often were witness to shadow people lurking in the halls.
That sounds like a fun place to go investigate.
I'm there. I want to go. In the 1960s, the Boston Strangler went by a variety of names: the Mad Strangler of Boston, the Phantom Strangler, the Green Man, among others, but perhaps one name he almost never went by was Albert DeSalvo. Again, I'm sorry.
That's been pretty close.
The man behind the 13 murders. DeSalvo was immediately locked up in the Old Salem jail, then the Essex County Correctional Institute. He confessed his identity as the notorious Boston Strangler to his fellow inmate, George Nasser, who then reported the admission to his attorney, F. Lee Bailey. DeSalvo was sentenced to life in prison in 1967. Though he escaped from the Bridgewater State Hospital just a few months later, he was later caught, re-imprisoned, and then found stabbed to death in the infirmary 6 years later. One of the upstairs windows of the jail is not uncommon to see a shadowy figure step close to the glass. Almost always, he is seen holding a candle as he roams from one room to another. But creepily enough, the floor that the spirit wanders no longer exists and is said to have collapsed years ago. That's
Sounds
cool.
residual,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of forming the same pattern over and over again.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And during the Civil War, Confederate soldiers were allegedly imprisoned in the Old Salem jail. More recently, there have been sightings of spirits wearing 19th century clothing at the old jail. Some believed these ghostly soldiers to be the source of the agonizing cries heard all throughout the night, and some linked these soldiers to the spirit with the candle.
Ooh.
And yet, nearly 200 years later, it still stands. A posh apartment complex with people vying for entry.
Wow. It's changed.
A little bit.
So, what's in your apartment? Well, my apartment is where the Boston Strangler used to live.
Can I sleep over?
I have never heard of a jail being repurposed into an apartment complex.
No, but I mean, I'm in,
It'd be fun to investigate if they would let you investigate their apartments. Makes it kind of tough, though. So we've talked a lot about, or not a lot about, but we've talked about the old Burying Point Cemetery, which we already discussed was the oldest cemetery in the country. Oldest cemetery in Salem, but the second oldest in the country.
Mm-hmm.
So there's numerous apparitions that walk around there. So we talked about the judge already. There's also been, believe it or not, a lady in white.
Another one?
Another one. Or the same one. Maybe she just goes around.
She's just...
She travels.
So she seems to appear quite often there, although she's quite camera shy. And so there's very little physical or photographic evidence of her manifestations. So it's kind of one of the things where you see this woman in white, you try to take her picture, and your camera don't work.
Well, and how often do you actually see an apparition and they're there longer than half a second?
Blink of an eye.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it's a rare thing.
So Mary Bright Corey's also seems to be hanging out there. So she died in 1684. She was the second wife of Giles Corey.
Dun, dun, dun.
She seems to be hanging out there as well. So the Coreys seem to haunt two separate cemeteries. So there's also, they've had mysterious shadows, emanating lights, orbs, white mists, And then the people have caught apparitions there, but not necessarily the lady in white. A few years back, a man by the name of Mike was visiting the cemetery, and had his own experience. He said, "I saw it peeking out of the ground." He said, as he described what he captured with his camera, he claimed that the apparition was in front of one of the gravestones, and it looked very strange torso, wearing a suit and tie, mutton chops, shoulder-length hair, or shoulder height, coming out of the ground.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've never heard that.
Yeah, I've never heard of them like half in the ground.
Peeking out.
Yeah.
Who goes there?
So
who's interrupting my sleep?
Right?
Exactly. Like just kind of like sitting up at the waist type of deal.
Who does disturb my slumber? Tell me now.
So interesting enough, Mike's story of someone coming out of the ground isn't the only one there. So there were two young friends that went into the cemetery at night, and as they were walking around the graveyard, they saw something that they would not soon forget. What they saw was a shadowy apparition rising from the ground right in front of a gravestone.
Okay, can I please see this?
I would love
Right?
to see this.
I mean, I would be all for that. That would be like the best ghostly experience ever.
So we need to go to a cemetery and just set up cameras all around and just sit there and wait.
I mean, honestly, let's do it.
Right?
That would be super cool.
It would be really fun.
Like
I
we
mean-
have done some cemetery.
I
Up
mean,
in
minor
Wyoming.
stuff.
We have, yeah, in Wyoming, we had some pretty dang good experiences just hanging out right there.
Yeah.
Like, that was so cool.
That was awesome.
I just think that if we actually set up cameras and investigation equipment in like a public cemetery after dark, I
It
wonder
might
how
look a little weird.
I wonder how long before the cops showed up.
Well, yeah, we have options.
We do.
We do. So one of the things that people believe kind of leads to this, feeling of ominous in the graveyard is there are lots of what they call death head tombstones. And so what they are is they're a skull with wings.
Okay, we've seen that.
Yep.
And under the death head, there's a phrase that says memento mori, which loosely translates to remember death.
Why would you want to remember that?
Right?
I don't know.
I got nothing.
So,
Why not remember life?
right? Maybe it's obviously it's for the living, right? Remember that we're all going into that.
Remember, we're all gonna die. Like,
That's
Who wants to be reminded of that? I mean,
that's so friendly.
that's so nice.
that's
of
so
them.
inviting.
So, and people say that they get cold sensations, and then in the daylight, as the sun's coming up in the daylight hours, they said that that you're standing amongst the ghosts, the lost souls of an era filled with terror. Very poetic.
I should say. And remember, you're gonna die.
Yeah. Well, that's what they do. That's what the gravestones tell you. We're all gonna die.
So we started with talking about Hocus Pocus, and I have one about that. So on 318 Essex Street, just picture this in your mind, a white, stark colonial, asymmetrical, 2-story house with gables. Does this sound familiar to anybody?
Yes.
No.
Well, rude. You may recognize the Ropes Mansion from the Disney classic Hocus Pocus.
Uh-huh.
So, this place has been mobbed, modernized, and reutilized. So, and in this house, one person has succumbed to smallpox. Another person has caught fire. So, this is the Ropes Mansion. Okay, it was built by Samuel Bernard in the late 1720s. And in 1839, Abigail Ropes met her tragic ending. Abigail's dress had ignited from the mansion's fireplace, and her petticoats went up in flames.
That is awful.
Yeah. So, and she didn't succumb right then. Abigail died a little bit later. But it says in her official obituary that Abigail succumbed to a distressing illness of 3 weeks caused by her clothes accidentally taking fire. 3 weeks. Okay, we know that when we get a burn on our hand or something, that hurts so bad unless there's like ice on it 24/7. Can you imagine your dress catching on fire and you have to deal with that for 3 weeks without having the things that we have to alleviate that pain? That is so miserable.
That is awful.
Miserable.
Couldn't do it.
And you got to imagine, like...
She didn't really have a choice.
No.
Well, right.
You know?
But I mean, in today's day and age, when we have things to help,
Yeah.
and then to choose not to,
Yeah.
I couldn't do it.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, that would be brutal. And I would imagine that part of the petticoats and stuff like that, because there was a lot of clothing
It is.
that they'd have to wear. I would imagine that a lot of it fused to her skin.
Ew. Well, and that's a lot of clothing to put out
Yeah.
when it's lit. So, So her nickname was Nabby. And Nabby allegedly haunts the Ropes mansion, and reports of her apparition have been reported throughout the history of the house. So, visitors to the Ropes mansion claim that they can hear sounds of her agonizing screams. And there are accounts of the mansion's gardens being haunted. And visitors claim to feel that the icy touch of an unseen spirit or hear the whispers of disembodied voice. So there was a man that worked the grounds, and he worked there until he died. So they're saying that it could possibly be him because he just loved the garden so much. He worked there until he died.
Yeah, I can imagine like people doing that because they've fallen in love with the area so much that, you know, they tend to stick around quite a bit. And so you kind of get that, you know, that love of place that people would stay around.
Yeah.
Although, like, why would he be touching people?
Well, I mean, when you're like tapping them, you're like, hey,
Oh, that's true.
I'm here. You know?
That's true. Like, a lot of people don't necessarily think of that. Like, you get touched and you're like, that's freaky.
Yeah.
And it could just be like, hey,
They're just trying to have you acknowledge that they're there. They're letting you know.
I mean, how boring would it be if you're in the area and nobody acknowledges you?
That would suck.
You know, that would be miserable.
Nobody likes to be forgotten.
no.
No, and why not pick up some fun while you're at it? Just go.
Have a little fun with it. Come
Right?
on.
You got to entertain yourself somehow.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, gotta have fun with someone, you know, along the lines. So there's a bookstore there that's haunted. It's called Wicked Good Books.
Yeah, that's cute.
I like it.
So it didn't always used to be Wicked Good Books. It used to be the Derby Square bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2013, it got renovated into what it is today. So the interesting thing about this bookstore is that it's connected to a series of underground tunnels.
Oh, that's cool. I've always fascinated by those underground tunnels.
Right?
Yes.
Well,
too.
you have like the Ogden tunnels.
Uh-huh.
You've got the Shanghai tunnels in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's all of these.
Even in Seattle.
Yeah,
there's
the
underground.
Seattle
I'm
Underground.
sure there's
All
so many
over.
tunnels.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times, like, the tunnels were used because, like, anything underground, it's easy to store goods. I mean, root cellars and stuff were because of that, right? You keep things safe underground, constant temperature, and they're cool.
Yeah.
So these ones, on the other hand, though, are a little bit different. Christopher John Luke Dogwin, he hypothesizes that the tunnel's history in Salem was history of the tunnels in the city. So it's a book he wrote. It's from the various wharves, goods were smuggled through trapdoors into the tunnels that led to the merchants and ship captains' homes. The tunnels, he suspects, stored merchandise that was later relocated to the shop fronts of Essex. So there were smugglers' tunnels, is what he was saying. Believe it or not, like, there were a lot of privateers in Salem, which we all know the name for a privateer. The other name for a privateer is pirate.
Oh, yeah. He's a pirate.
He's a pirate. Dogwin likewise believes that the underground system was built in 1801 by the son of Elias Haskett Derby, post-revolutionary merchant of Salem. Fun fact about him, he was America's first millionaire.
Wow.
Ooh.
He was also a privateer.
Well.
Surprise.
He had the subterranean space that allowed him to bypass the tariffs imposed by President Jefferson. The tunnels may have additionally assisted senators, congressmen, and Supreme Court justices in tax evasion.
Amongst other things.
Yes. So the underground system was a shoo-in for smugglers, and they've been connected to the Secretary of the Navy.
Jeez.
So that goes pretty high up
Yeah.
in that avenue. So he also suspects that the subterranean system is haunted. Now, this is where we get into the high classification of haunting and the high proof. He's like, I barely lifted my cell phone from its case on my belt when the phone flew 25 feet into an open manhole.
What?
Yeah, the manholes are connected to the underground tunnel.
Uh-huh.
So he picks up his phone, he takes it out. Remember the old belt cases you could
Oh, yeah.
wear?
I totally had a nerdy
Belt case?
Yes.
So he picked up his phone. It says he picks up his phone. It flies out of his hand 25 feet.
That's quite the distance.
That's quite the distance into a manhole. He didn't throw it on accident.
And that's pretty darn accurate to go into a manhole.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like throwing something across the table into somebody's mouth, like perfectly.
Yeah, like,
Yeah,
an
like that.
assorted dehydrated marshmallow bit.
Which
I mean, just random thought.
random thought. That never happens before
Like,
a
no.
podcast is recorded.
No. Those things don't happen.
No. He adds that his batteries in his electronic device was mysteriously drained while near the wharf. And there were orbs.
Those orbs.
They show up all the time. But seafarers are spotted as full body apparitions aimlessly ambiating Derby Wharf. So the visitors report cold spots near the tunnels as well as other signs of supernatural activity such as sounds of disembodied voices and footsteps.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah. So a lot of this sounds residual though.
It does.
And that's
It
the
does.
thing with this is that they're all very similar. The haunts are very similar. That they're
A lot of orbs.
a lot of orbs, a lot of walking
Disembodied voices.
and I mean that I guess does encompass ghost hunting in general.
It does.
But when it's the same and they're saying the same thing in every place,
Yeah.
But let's try this one. The Ghosts of the Salem Inn. So, the Salem Inn, also known as the West Cogswell House, was built in 1834 by Nathaniel West, and West was one of the sea captains and merchants in Salem. The house would later become home to Union Civil War General Williams Cogswell. Cogswell would go on to serve as the 16th mayor of Salem and then later elected again as the 19th mayor. So over 30 years ago, the dilapidated West House found new life as the Salem Inn. The Pabbage family came to Salem from Norwood in 1983 looking for a property to invest in, not knowing that they were about to find their calling as innkeepers.
Dun, dun,
Dun, dun,
dun.
dun. So let's go to the ghosts of the room 17. Okay. So room 17 of the Salem Inn is perhaps the most haunted room in the inn that the inn has to offer. But who is it haunted by? That is, in itself, a mystery. The ghost of room 17 is believed to be a woman. Some have dubbed her Elizabeth, perhaps a reference to Nathaniel West's wife, who famously divorced him for his affairs. Although others refer to the spirit as Catherine. According to a psychic who visited Salem Inn, she claims that room 17 is indeed haunted by the ghost of a woman who was killed by her husband. This betrayal by her husband has led her spirit's ill treatment of any man who stays in the room. Usually when a man does spend the night in 17, she'll become quite active in order to disrupt their sleep. She achieves this by causing loud noises in the closet and stomping around the room. So that's different.
It is different. That sounds more
And this
intelligent.
sounds more legit, right?
Yeah.
But don't fret, as there is supposedly a way to win favor with her. It has been said that if you leave a tumbler of whiskey, or any alcohol for that matter, she just may leave you to a restful night of sleep.
So she likes to drink.
She's demanding, she's making noise because she wants her drink. She's just here for the booze.
Yeah, right?
The second spirit isn't so much of who as it is believed to be a ghost of a cat.
How perfect.
How perfect is this? The last of this spirit triangle is to believe a ghost of a child. The staff have said that they have heard the sound of a child giggling at times when there was no kids staying in the inn. Moreover, some staff members have also heard light footsteps following them around in the inn. Footsteps so faint that they could only have been made by a child. But upon turning around expecting to see a kid in need of assistance, they are baffled by the discovery of nothing. A woman named Kathy stayed in the West House during the month of July back in 2012. The room she had booked was not 17, but 11. Apparently her encounter was with the ghostly cat. As she tells it, she was laying in bed trying to go to sleep when she felt a slight pressure on the bed, almost as if a small animal had jumped onto the bed. She claims the cat began to paw at her feet until she finally kicked it. Afterwards, she didn't experience the cat for the rest of the night.
That's so rude. You kick a ghost cat.
How rude!
Must be a ghost cat.
Honestly, like, if I was laying in bed and there was a cat that jumped up and started purring and like, mixing biscuits, like, that'd be neat.
That would be so cool. I mean, I'd be all for it.
Yeah. So what's interesting is there's reports in theories that Salem is haunted by many cats.
Okay, that just makes me want to go there just hearing that.
But they claim it's haunted by many cats because, witches have to have a cat with them.
Dang it.
Got your hopes up for a second, huh?
Yeah, you did.
No, I don't doubt that there's probably lots of animal hauntings around.
I mean, I've had a cat around me at times, and it was while I had, and I think I've talked about this before on other podcasts, that it would jump up on the counter and try to drink my cat's water, and you could see the ripples in the water, and you could hear it lick the water, but there's no cat, and the water isn't disappearing. But you could see the ripples. It was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've had issues, we've had hauntings, our appearances from our past cats as well.
And it's always so sweet.
Yeah.
It is.
But I haven't been to a place that had a random cat encounter.
No.
Mm-mm.
So it'll be neat, to see that. Let's talk about the last place for tonight. It's called the Rockefellers, which makes me think of
Rockefellers.
the Rockefellers, the oil barons. That is not the case. And this is not even a historic landmark, this place. So it's actually a restaurant, and it was built in 2003. So, why, what's the history around this place? So it's actually on the site of Salem's first church. So it was it was originally constructed as a place of worship. The interesting thing is that it was a fourth meeting house and is designed by Boston's Salem Willard and Peter Banner. Its new incarnation was built right on top of the three preceding.
Interesting.
So they built multiple buildings on top of each other.
Huh.
Which seems to be kind of the
Lazy?
par. Yeah, lazy. It's called repurposing.
No, lazy.
So once the building was completed in 1826, the church used the second floor for their services And they rented out the first floor to local businesses to help kind of keep the cost down because they built a giant building.
Yeah.
So nearly 50 years later, around 1874, the building was remodeled into a Victorian Gothic style.
Oh, that's cool.
Which eventually became the home of a jewelry store for Daniel Lowe and Company. And then because they acquired it from the Salem's first church after they merged with the Unitarian North Church. What's interesting about this is that it is connected also to the tunnels.
I want to go in some tunnels.
I do too.
It'd be fun,
Let's
wouldn't
go.
it?
Somebody let us go into some tunnels.
Please.
You have connections. We want in.
That would be awesome.
It'd be amazing.
Like the Ogden Underground, like the Ogden tunnels. I think they're all walled off, though. But
so they say.
If they're walled off, can't you open them back up?
I can.
So people who have walked around the Rockefellers have said they've got, wouldn't you know it, orbs floating around the second story window.
Oh,
And let me
my.
guess. There's a woman in white.
No,
What?
there's not.
Disembodied voices.
That's impossible.
There is. They actually have spotted a full body apparition of a man in a black suit, but not Johnny Cash.
Oh, darn.
So
It's a little bit before his time.
A
Well,
little bit.
no. No, is this a newer building?
this is 2003. It's after his
It's
time.
after his time.
Yeah. So, but it looks more like a minister, actually. And then the woman that's there is in an early 20th century blue dress,
Ooh.
Oh, not white, but blue.
Blue.
but blue. So if you're ever downstairs in the vault, which is connected to the tunnels, you may hear her screaming in distress
Uh-oh.
Why are the women always screaming?
because
Oh.
probably because usually they're screaming because they've been brutally murdered, which is sad in itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which in this case is the truth for her. So according to the legend, she was beneath the building in the tunnels waiting for her love, a sailor. When the sailor finally arrived, she informed him that she was with child and demanded the sailor marry her.
Uh-oh.
We've heard a story like this before.
Many.
So while the woman loved the sailor, he did not feel the same way. In fact, he was a little bit darker. He did not want to have the woman any longer and didn't want to be responsible for the child. So he, made not the right. Good
Whoa.
Lord, I'm dark. He made his reasoning and said, well, she's with child. I don't want her anymore. So I'm just going to kill her.
Wow. Sad.
That
That's
is
terrible.
sad. So another account of this blue lady is she was an employee of the company. And she was working late one night down in the tunnels, and she died. She just passed away. And
I mean, she wasn't very old though, right?
no,
So,
could be heart attack, could be
I
brain
mean, it's
aneurysm.
weird. It's just like she was working down there and she just died.
Yep, and they didn't find her until the morning.
Oh.
So the lady in blue actually first started appearing, as a mystery because no one knows when the first sighting was. But the first confirmed sighting was not long after the Rockefellers opened in 2003. So now the black suited man, the minister.
Mm-hmm.
So he's said to have been a minister who was severely depressed and committed suicide on the grounds. So, obviously because there was the church there before and everything else. And so he must have been the minister of one of the churches. And he, suffered from depression and committed suicide. So that's who they believe he is. No name associated to him.
Right.
Which you'd think if a minister committed suicide in town, that they would have
Some type of
record it.
documentation of that. Yeah.
Exactly. So since the place opened, staff and customers alike have encountered the minister. The ghost is usually described as wearing a black suit and appearing quite somber. The interesting thing is he also doesn't like the living.
Oh, surprise, surprise.
So he's awful, very rude and grumpy.
Yeah.
So the women scream and the men are grumpy.
Yeah.
Yep. sounds stereotypical, right? Like, are we just stereotyping ghosts now?
I mean, why not? But
Well, it's always a woman in a dress.
some sort of dress, usually white.
Usually white,
Some cases blue, some cases black.
but always a dress.
Always a dress. A
And-
gown.
And men are usually in suits and grumpy.
Mhm.
Yes.
They have like a top hat or
Mutton chops.
yeah.
Or soldier's uniform.
Yep, or soldiers.
So I think we covered a pretty good swath of Salem. And the crazy part is I think we only scratched the surface.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there are
Yeah.
so much more. That's why it'd be so fun to go, because just the tales are fun and the stories that people have, but I'm sure it's like all over.
Oh, I'm
all
sure.
over that area. I mean, it's
Yeah.
an old part of the United States.
400 years old
Yeah.
and counting.
So, I mean, granted, that's not very old considering for a country, but that's still old for us.
Yeah.
And so there's going to be some good stories that are to be had over there.
Right. Well, and also, like, you still have the indigenous people there too.
Uh-huh.
So, like, you have all of their history in wars and stuff. Like,
Right.
if you look at the East, there was a heavy concentration of tribes there,
Mm-hmm.
and things weren't always peaceful. So you'd have their wars and stuff, and plus you also have their famine and their issues. So it'd be just neat to be able to experience.
I
all
would
of that
love
history.
to go see the old headstones.
I
Yeah,
would too.
That would be fascinating.
That'd be awesome.
that would be awesome. Like we have old ones here in the West, but not that old.
And a lot of ours are made out of sandstone, and so you can't really read what they say on them because they've deteriorated so much from the weather.
Or they
Yeah.
used wood, which it's still around, but again, it's just
Nothing
Right.
on it.
it looks like a popsicle stick sticking in the ground.
Right.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just neat. Like as an investigator, like I feel a little on the, I don't want to say gyp side, but it jealous side, I think is probably more accurate. Like the founding history of this country, all of
Right.
the old haunted stuff is all out east.
Yep. And they have like annual haunting tours of mansions and of plantations and things like that. That would be really fun to
Yeah.
go see.
Add it to the list.
Myrtle Plantation.
The list
Yes.
the list
wanna
never
go there.
ends. Myrtle would be awesome.
Yep.
So we've kept you guys enthralled, hopefully long enough. So we're going to let you all rest for the evening. But before we let you all go, where can they find us?
I don't know where.
On Facebook, you can find us at Cold Spot Paranormal Research. And on Instagram, you can find us on coldspot_paranormal_research. And at Twitter, at CPR Paranormal.
And you can also find us on Facebook at Paranormal Peeps Podcast.
Yes, you can.
And as always, stay ghosty, my peeps. So it's not that
Got one more. We need a double. There you go. Okay, thank you. Darby, everybody.
that is going into the outtakes, folks. Thank you for listening to the Paranormal Peeps Podcast. You can find us on social media at Twitter at CPR Paranormal, on Facebook at Paranormal Peeps Podcast and Cold Spot Paranormal Research, And you can find us on Instagram at coldspot_paranormal_research.